Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Matza, percussionist, drummer, and artistic director of Kosa Music, inviting you to join in conversation with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in our music world. And also remember to like and subscribe so you may receive new and upcoming episodes that will come up. Today I have the great pleasure of finally, after a few mishaps and rescheduling and technical issues, we finally got my someone I respect very much for his work and who he is and what he's done, Mr. Skip Hadden. Thank you, Skip, for joining me today.
Hi there, Aldo. It's great to finally get this together.
It was funny. We tried a few times with the technology, and then I go back. I said no, but it worked for me. So we finally got it together. So let's not jinx it. Fantastic. You know, technology is incredible. I love it when it works. When it doesn't, it's oh boy. We all have our stories on that one. But before we get on to the discussion about shaping your journey, just tell us a little bit, what was the very beginning for you? Like, what was that spark? What got you going in the very beginning, in the beginning?
Yes. So when I found out we were going to do this, I started like taking notes, and it ended up being like, I came back several days later, you know, but the initial thing was, I think I was 4 years old. I don't remember the stuff, but my mother and grandmother filled this stuff in for me long ago. She was part of Eastern Star, which was the women's part of the Masons. And they had this, I think it was a Christmas thing or something, and they gave gifts away to the kids of the members. And all I remember in my mind was there was a set of drums and there was a spotlight above it, kind of like that thing of Frank Sinatra with the cigarette in the ashtray kind of thing.
Right.
And it was like, and I wanted that because we could pick what we wanted. And my grandmother wouldn't let me have that. I got the doctor's bag because I was supposed to be a doctor because I had these long, thin fingers and I was supposed to be a surgeon. And so that was it. And finally, my mother set it up for me to have lessons starting when I was 7. And so she knew my lessons much better than me, but she had set it up with a guy, I don't know if you remember him, but he was a heavy presence in advertisements and stuff in Modern Drummer magazine at the beginning. Ralph Pace, he did the set the pace pads and all that.
Yes, and also, didn't he have that drum set, the pads?
Yeah, those were the set the pace pads. Yeah.
Yes, I had one once. Yes.
Well, yeah, he was really good at that. He was an entrepreneur. He was a drummer in the marching band in the Army, like probably Korea.
Okay.
And then he came back and he had this little setup in his parents' basement. And then he also had a Dairy Queen place, and he played gigs. I mean, he was like, really covered the bases. So the initial deal with him was he'd never had anybody as young as me, and he didn't know if it would work, would take. And he had several different books. I still have them stacked there from when I studied with him, but it was interesting stuff. And I had and still do ADD kind of stuff, so it's hard for me to focus. So 20 minutes was about all my mother could get me to do. I still have the practice pad from
nice.
years ago.
I gave mine away. Those were, because they were really heavy. I remember the frames were real wood and very heavy, but very intelligent.
Yeah, it was all plywood.
Yeah.
Yeah, you weren't moving that around once you set it up.
No.
It was interesting stuff. And I did that for like 3 years. And then I was in marching band that whole time at school. But I couldn't practice at home. And I only had a snare drum because I lived in my grandmother's house. So it was kind of, this is how it goes kind of thing.
Right.
And then we moved. And my dad got transferred to Cleveland. And by then I was honor society and into sports and stuff. I had moved away from drums, but I still had the snare drum. And then I had a falling out with the coach, would be a good way to put it. And so I stopped playing football. But because I was like this size at like 12, you know.
Wow.
So I couldn't move very fast, but I presented a formidable block for anybody to get through.
A serious threat. Yeah, yeah.
And so that ended up being, I got interested in the drums again, but I didn't have any drums. And some friends at school had a band, and they said, why don't you join this band? Our drummer is leaving. So I said, okay. So they had drums, they had a manager, they had this whole thing set up. I walked into this situation, it was like amazing. And so we would travel around the Midwest and open up for big name things. And then that band ended up being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Local Legends, because Cleveland was the beginning of rock and roll. So this is like 1960, 61. So a fair piece ago. Last century is what I like to explain.
Oh man, archives. Yeah. And then, did you study formally in a university after that?
No, I never went to school because actually, in order to play drums, I left home at 15 because I was supposed to be a doctor. Back to that story. So I didn't finish high school. I went to work and I got a job as a janitor, and I saved up my money and I bought a set of drums, my first set of drums. And then all of this occurs when I'm traveling with this band, like on weekends or whatever. They had like a van kind of thing with all the equipment in it and roadies. I mean, it was like perfect little setup. Small, but really perfect thing. So we would open for like Duke of Earl, different top name things at that time in the Midwest. And all that time that I was doing that, I was also doing this. It was a television show in Cleveland on Saturdays called Big Five. And I got called to back up this little 10-year-old. I'm like 16. And we did that and then ended up doing it several times. But her stepdad, and he and I got along. So I ended up like, he took me in, I lived at his house, and I was the babysitter for the 10-year-old and her brother and that kind of stuff. But he was into jazz. So the whole thing ended up being, his wife gave me a car because then I could drive. I mean, the whole thing just started to like open up. I'm like, oh, this is neat. It was kind of like walking into the situation with the band. And so I ended up providing the drums for other people, big name people that were on this show that would come in. Roland Kirk with Steve Ellington.
Wow.
Who else was? Lionel Hampton. Hugh Walker was with saxophonist at the time. I don't remember his name. But I mean, I met all these guys and they were really nice to me. And the whole thing started expanding from there. And then I finally went back and finished high school because I thought, wait a minute, if I wanted to go to Berklee, I need a diploma. I can't just show up. So I went back and finished high school. But by then, I was living in a different town and commuting in to go to high school. I think I was even married then, but nobody knew. I mean, it was like, so all of that precluded me going to school because right after I was married, then there was my first daughter, and this whole thing started building, so I could never do anything but work. But I was working 3-4 nights a week when I was in high school.
Wow. And you were still in Cleveland at the time?
Yeah. Yeah, I was a West Sider. It's divided East and West Side. But I spent all my time right after this with all the guys on the East Side. Primarily it would have been people of color on the East Side and jazz players. And I was like on the West Side with rock and roll guys. So it was like, how does this fit? But people were very nice to me, and I would go and sit in. I had a motorcycle at the time, and I was called Motorcycle Kid, and I would go and sit in a place called the Esquire on Cleveland, there was a block at 105th, East 105th in Euclid, and you could sit in on Saturday afternoons and Sunday, a matinee, you could sit in. So I got to play with like all kind of different people and meet them. Frank Wright, I don't know if you ever heard of Frank Wright was
Yeah,
like
I know the name.
avant-garde saxophone player. I mean, you know, what? You know. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. So they were very nice to me, and I met Joe Alexander, and I would go over at his house, set my drums up and play in the basement next to the furnace. I mean, it was like just nuts stuff. And I would hang out with whatever I could. I met Kenny Davis. I don't know if you know the trumpeter. He ended up doing a lot of work and teaching at Oberlin. And David Johnson, a really great bass player, and Joe Wilson, baritone player. And all those guys were really great because they introduced me to being able to get in to see like James Brown, all these acts that were primarily for a Black audience.
Right.
I would be there with them, so it would be cool.
Right.
And I would take those out to get those guys to invite them to come out to my house and ride my motorcycle with me in this primarily white neighborhood on the west side. So it was that kind of thing going on all the time. And the interesting thing for me, I didn't realize it at the time, was one of the reasons that the band made the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was the first known integrated band. The guitar player was Black, and that wasn't what was happening.
Okay.
That time period. It was either this or it was this.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing when you think back. But then, here's a question for you that I wanted to, I'm just curious about. When you were playing, you weren't reading yet. You were just learning songs. You were learning to play drums, but to the songs. And there's a reason why I'm asking you this, because I think there's a big difference when one learns music as we learn the language. You learn the repertoire, you learn songs, your styles, and all of that, and then you go and figure out what it sounds like, what it works, how it works, and that seems to be normally a better approach, rather than you schooled musician and then you go and play. You have a lot better bass, I would say. Was that your experience, Skip?
Well, mine was all playing.
Right. So you just learned songs and you played with bands. That's it.
Yeah, when I was in the rock band, I just played the beats. You know, I didn't do any fills. I wasn't none of that.
Right.
Because I was trying to figure out how I could take the language that I knew from rudiments on the snare drum and play that in the drum set. And there was a big disconnect between functioning in the band and playing the drums.
Right. Yeah. No, it's interesting.
And so, yeah, the practical experience is now like inverted for students now. Now it's all like, well, the internet, you can take lessons, or you can come and study with me, or you can study with somebody in your hometown. But I find that a lot of teachers, for people that come in from studying with other teachers, they don't do all three learning styles with the students. They either do a lot of, technique stuff, some grooves, although the School of Rock is an exception to that, where you have to read and you see parts and they teach you beats. But playing in the band and actually playing with other people and getting along with them isn't a part of that experience.
Right.
And when people get to school, then they have to play, they're learning all this stuff, but again, they're in ensembles. At Berklee, every student has an ensemble. So they're trying to figure out how to do that same challenge that I was faced with,
Yeah.
But they've only been themselves. So that's really, I think, hard for students now to make that transition from being alone to being with other people and listening. I mean, I spend so much time listening that because the part of the thing about the learning experience of listening, seeing, hearing, and kinesthetic experience of grabbing hold of an idea. Now it's hard for people to get a hold of an idea because handouts are now on your phone.
That's right.
So
or almost implanted.
It's an interesting challenge, I find.
Right.
But a lot of times guys will have beats and they don't have the music or examples of how this stuff that you're teaching them is practical, not just drum stuff. It's in support of not only the form of the tune, but the phrasing of the song. And in the case of a jazz thing or any solos, the phrasing that's within the solo. So like that old article I did for Modern Drummer about listening, there was 10 questions that you asked yourself about what are you hearing, where do you hear it, what's going on with what hand, can you tell that from listening? So I find that, no,
Right.
people that are even watching videos on YouTube aren't paying attention to those things.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting because that was my experience because by 17, I wasn't really reading, but I'd been playing with so many people. I'd learned so much, and I was just hungry for things. And then when I realized, I actually went to a drum camp, and I finally got to study with some of the people that were heroes that I didn't really know what they were doing, but this is what I wanted to know more about. So imagine my first Delivery Percussion Symposium. I started getting interested in classical music, jazz, and I wanted to really expand because I was just a rock drummer. And then I was expanding, and I was seeing everybody from the original Weather Report to you name it, with Ayrton and Alphonse Mozon. And I went crazy with all of this. And I went to this camp, and my very first lesson on vibraphone was with Gary Burton.
Okay.
He showed me how to hold the four mallets. That was that was funny. And then, Joe Morello was there. They're talking about trading fours. And I said, well, we trade cards. I didn't know what trading fours. So it was like a fast forward learning process. But I realized later I had a big advantage. And that's the reason why I asked you that question. I asked some of the other guys too, that same thing, because it seems to make a big difference. If you've learned to play the music and you're really listening and you have to take things apart yourself, back in the day, lift up that needle and figure out what that fill was, or what that groove was, or what that interaction was with the bass player. And then, later I got interested in other music, like how does this work? And then I would see, when I first went to university, I would see people playing Liszt and Rachmaninoff, and especially Liszt. I mean, all these great things. I'm saying, oh my God, this is. But I remember at one point, a friend of mine, his music fell off the piano, and he stopped playing. And I said, why'd you stop? He says, well, I don't have the music. I said, you don't know the music? So what are you playing? So that really confused me, and it threw me in a loop for a minute, because I said, I'm practicing 8-10 hours a day, trying to learn to be like these people, and you take the music away from them, and it's like turning off the power. So that took me a minute to understand like what really happened. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, and not trying to figure out, understand it, and say the advantage we have learning the music from the inside and then taking it apart, seeing what was that. You create it first and then you analyze it afterwards, like Mozart. I mean, he didn't compose by formula. He was composing because he heard it in his head and it made sense.
Yeah.
Right? So I think this was a much better approach. And in all fairness, I mean, back in the day where we were growing up, there was a lot of music, so you could be playing all over the place and with everybody all the time. Today, I'm sure it's not the case, and people really have to go out to find somebody to even play with, unless it's online or just one-to-one with a pre-recorded something, but online. But it's not the same as being in the room and trying to make this thing work. It's like the sessions when the drummer has to come up with drum parts. You come up with these parts because you've had so much experience of trying different things that you know what works with different combinations. Or if a bass player does something, or a guitar player, or a keyboard player, or somebody else, then you have enough musicality that you've heard and experienced yourself that you can draw from a lot more comfortably, would you say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was my experience, like doing the weather report thing.
Right.
I mean, they called me to do that. I had the gig the night before, and I
Wait,
just stayed up, loaded the drums up, and went to LA. And I
so
got there, and there was another drummer there, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." He paid the basic beat, and then I had to come up with something that was going to be like a percussionist, but with the drum set itself. So if you listen closely, you can hear all these other notes that are in between it, besides I'm playing the time on the hi-hat at double the time that he's playing it. Because I
okay,
was always trying to create these different layers within the music. And they had hired me because they had heard that I could bring the energy. I mean, that's why I was there.
okay. Well, how did
And
that come
so,
up? How did that come up? Well, like somebody recommended you?
oh yeah, yeah, Roy McCurdy. He was a
Okay.
friend of mine, the drummer with Cannonball Adderley. I worked at the same club for 4 years. It was like my going to college. And we were the opening band for Weather Report, Cannonball Adderley, Les McCann,
Wow.
Grover Washington. And if guys showed up with groups that the drummer could make it, then I got to play with the artists that came in. So I did Sonny Stitt, Jimmy Smith, Groove Holmes. I don't know, it's a bunch of different people. I had Lou Donaldson. I mean, and they were all nice to me. We'd be like, well, okay.
Sure. Beautiful.
Either
Beautiful.
they were going, okay, this is what we got for this week or two or whatever, but they would just let me play.
Nice.
He never said anything about what I was supposed to be doing. Sonny Stitt was funny because when I'd be playing, I'd do something, he'd turn around and go, yeah, I hear you. So I thought that I took that as a positive, as opposed to that I was playing too loud. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's
Like Lou
nice.
Donaldson was nice. He said, well, if you ever come to New York, you can come and you can play with me there, but I couldn't see myself going to New York with all the familial stuff I had happening. But the reason that I ended up actually even studying with anybody, like at the drums and learning how to negotiate the drum set, was because that same guy who took me in and I lived at his house, and he had records and I listened to those. He took me to a club in downtown Cleveland called the Theatrical. And there was a drummer that played in the house band by the name of Bob McKee. And he worked there every 6 nights a week. But during the week at 1 o'clock, he was the drummer on the Mike Douglas show, the daytime show.
Okay.
So he could play. And he had worked with a big band, and I'm forgetting what the name of it was. But they had the hit Night Train, and he was on that. Sorry, I don't remember might remember in the course of the conversation, but that he and I studied with him. We took me to the club to see this guy, and I had no idea who he was. He said, well, do you like the way this guy plays? And I said, yeah. And so he set it up for me to study with him.
Okay.
And
Nice.
I stayed friends and studied with Bob on and off until he passed away 4 years ago. And then later on, he even came up and spent a week with me here at the house, and we got along. I mean, Ralph Pace actually came up for dinner after, I think it was 57 years after I studied with him. He was here at the house having dinner. It was like this connection that through drumming, never really ends.
Right.
But the
Yeah.
weather report thing, to get back with that club, was I worked opposite all these people, and they're all very nice to me. Jerry Brown was there with an artist I don't remember, and he said, we got to get you out of here. And he set up a gig for me in The Hague with Chris Henza, flautist. And then everything was cool, and then I couldn't make it come up with my family and that. So people were always nice in helping me out. Worked opposite Elvin, and the pedal broke on my drum set, so I said, what can I do? He said, oh man, take whatever you need. Use my drums. You guys sound like Africa. I mean, it was like,
Nice. Wow.
yeah, I mean, it just, I get goosebumps when I think about all these experiences where people were just open up their hearts to you to let you be you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I found out through those experiences that I couldn't do what anybody else was doing. if I tried to do like you were talking about, write it out and analyze it, I was no good at any of that. But I would get ideas about how it could be, and then I could manifest those later on with the help I got from Bob McKee and lessons with him. And then Bob was saying, man, you got to get your chops together a little bit more. So I studied with a guy, Eddie Bobick, and I was maybe 23 or 24 at the time, and worked for 9 months with him just on my hands with the rudiments. And then when I got that job at the nightclub where I worked opposite all those people, I had all these tools from doing that.
Sure.
And it all kind of fit together, that what I was listening to and what I was hearing that I could generate with these combinations around my body ended up being like all the material that's in the books that I've written.
Yeah, but also, I mean, I think part of all of that too is your attitude towards all of that. Like if you have a personality that just invites goodness, I mean, for lack of a better word, I think people, certainly in our community, in music in general, we're always throw stuff at you. I mean, I've had the same experiences where I'd show up and I'd be playing with all kinds of people just because, for me, I just wanted to learn. I wanted to be a fly on the wall. I wanted to be just there, So, and people enjoy that, earnest learning, and you're serious about what you do, and not having to prove something, but you're in the music and you're going somewhere with this, or you're trying to go somewhere with this. So people will help you, right?
Well, I think it comes from my end of it was that I always taught all of it not just as a challenge, but a learning experience. And that made it so, wait a minute, how can I negotiate this in a way that's going to be not a drag? Even though the situation might be at the time, it'd be like, wait a minute, why is this happening? This can't just all be, getting run over by a truck. You have to be able to jump out of the way and get the license number or something.
Right. Yeah. Just getting back to the weather report, was it which album was that? Just trying to think that you were playing on. Was it more than one?
Mysterious Traveler.
Mysterious Traveler, right. I was listening to a few of the tracks, some really, really high energy on this. Really, really nice. This was heavy weather, right? But
yes, it's before that. That was the one after me was Freezing Fire with Ndugu. And then the heavy weather one was a combination of big name drummers. I think like Jocko played on drums on some, Steve Gadd, maybe Tony Williams. It was one of those kind of
Alex.
But it
also
wasn't the guys that were playing live in the band at the time, which probably would have been like Chester Thompson.
Well, Alex Acuna was there at that time?
Yeah, just before that was Badrina and Manolo Badrina and Alex Acuna. And then I think there was Jose was playing percussion, maybe with Chester Thompson, or what was his name? Billy Thompson, was that his name? He was on a bunch of stuff then, and then much later on at the end. The band went from 1970 to 1985.
Right. Yeah, and that was what a great band. I remember seeing the original, as I said, with Alphonse Mazon and Ayrton playing percussion, and in a small club in Ottawa. And I mean, the band took up like 70% of the room because they were like everywhere, and we were in the corners listening. I mean, it was just amazing what they were doing, and every experiment that they did was always so nice and always challenging, outside the box, which was really nice. How did you find working with them? As far as, did they allow you to do whatever you wanted?
Yes. I mean, they brought me there. They said, we brought you here for the energy. So I just did what I did. They never listened to those first days, the ones that ended up being the two tunes that I did on that recording. I only did like two. There's another one that was called Miroslav's tune that's on YouTube that didn't make that recording. And that's just me. But Otherwise, it was two drummers, and I'm playing everything in between him, just like Damo Hamau was playing percussion, but I'm doing it on drum set, trying to do those different layers. But the idea was for me to take that and make more than what was happening with just him. He ended up getting the gig and doing some live dates with him, and then they got rid of him too. They brought in Daryl Jones, or Daryl James, I think it was, to be the other drummer, two drummers, because they're always trying to amp up what was happening with the percussion. And that happened throughout the course of the band. And so many different drummers went through the band, it was like, whoa.
Yes.
I heard stories about they would have guys, they would tell them to come meet them at a hotel or something. The guy would sit in the lobby for the whole day and they never even went down and talked to him. And then he would go home. And that happened to some guy from Europe even too. So it was like disaster, you know.
Ouch.
But the experience with Joe was cool. Those first couple of days it was with Miroslav.
Okay.
So there was a bass player there. Alfonso Johnson was also a friend of mine from working at that club because he was there with Chuck Mangione and Joe LaBarbera. And we got to hang out for a week or two, maybe 72, a couple of years before. But he didn't know I was on that recording. They never told him. And so they brought him in and he had filled in the bass parts in the studio after they took Miroslav off. The third or fourth day we were at the studio, I noticed that Miroslav was in his car in the parking lot. And I was like, what the heck's going on here? And then he and Joe had it out.
Okay. Oof.
So he was history. So we did the rest of it without him. And they never listened to the tracks I did the first day or two. And then when they went back in, they wanted to alter those tracks. But they only had the dailies. They only had cassettes. So what you're hearing on that is actually, you know, beefed up, redone mixes of the cassettes, to my knowledge. But those two tunes end up being in any, there's several of these things from different countries and different labels, where it's the best of Weather Report or Fusion 101 or something like it. One of them has Ayrton on it, Tony Williams, and me. I'm like, whoa.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, okay. So talk about luck, you know. And all of those things for Joe passing away, any of those things always have those best of. Those two tracks are included in that. And most recently, in all the Wayne Shorter retrospectives, those two tunes are in there that I'm on. So
Nice.
It's like you have to really be careful what you record because it never goes away.
That's right.
Kind of
Oh
thing.
yeah. Oh no, that's amazing. It's funny. I just remembered we had done a record with my percussion group before Repercussion. It was a 9-piece percussion group with our teacher Pierre Beluse, and we were actually the students of McGill at the time. We were all 9 guys. Besides our teacher, we 8 plus Pierre, and happened to be all the top guys who were doing all the work in town. It was one of those waves of things where we were doing everything. Sometimes artists would call the studio where we rehearsed to see if the group was going on tour, if it would interfere with their tour, because they needed one of us.
Yeah, conflict.
And the record was called. We did our version of The Path by Ralph McDonald, all percussion version. And Ralph actually gave us the music, the pieces that they had written out. So we put it all together. And that was way back. And I got a call, something on Facebook from somebody. It says, are you Aldo Mazza with this group? It was called Concept Neuf, Neuf, which is 9. Said, were you part of this band? This was a huge hit in Italy. It was a huge hit in some other places. And I didn't know. So we followed it up. And then there's a German label who contacted me and said this thing was huge. So we re-released it. And now it's been copied by a number of other people. And it's out there. And people who wanted to use it for, commercials or something, they re-recorded the parts. So I mean, all of these things get into play, but it's an incredible record. But it was one of those things that we just did because we wanted to do something really different apart from the classical stuff. We wanted to do everything percussion from top to bottom. And two of the guys in repercussion were in that group, and then we went on to continue after that group kind of not folded, but everybody went their separate ways. It's hard to keep 9 people together, especially percussionists who are all the busy guys in town.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. We're loading in over here, you know, that kind of.
Oh yes, oh yeah, that was something. But before you, what was your path to getting to Berklee? Were you studying there, or did you go directly to teach afterwards?
Well, the first time they asked me was 1975 when the Weather Report thing came out. Well, that was the Downbeat Jazz Album of the Year. So it was really, you know, boom, you know,
Yes,
who's
yes.
this guy? But I had been going to Berklee for 2 or 3 years before that because Joe Hunt had been a friend of mine from the late 60s. And he started teaching there in 71. And I was playing at a club that had a bar on the street level in Cleveland, and Joe was there for playing Pickwick or something, a show that traveled around the country. And he was out walking around, and they had a speaker outside. And he heard the music, and he came in, and it was a little teeny bar, like a closet, and had an elevator in it. And you went up to the 3rd floor, and it took the whole 3rd floor. And what was a show of girls dancing, a comic, singers. I mean, it was like that kind of thing. I worked at like 6 nights a week. We could play. The first set was an organ trio, Jerry Sturgill, Ron Lishner. And so I had this gig. And it turned out that it was upstairs and across the street from where my teacher was playing at the Theatrical Grill. So on my breaks, I could run down and see him play. And I met like Papa Joe Jones, Gene Krupa, all those people that he would be playing opposite. It was like you couldn't miss all these opportunities, you know. He heard that music. He came and actually sat in, and we became friends. And then later he traveled and came and stayed at my house with me for a little bit. And he was always after me to come to Berklee because it was like, I don't know if it was Misery Loves Company, but he was always trying to get me to come up there. And when they asked in 75, I was playing a lot and doing, and I thought maybe that Weather Report stuff would just continue. And it didn't. So when they asked me in 78 to come, I said, okay, I'll do it. And I'm getting ready to go. I taught all this time. From about 63, I was teaching in different studios. So this is like 15 years into it teaching, and I'm at a couple different drum studios in Toledo and in Cleveland. And it was 161 miles, I think, from where I was living in the woods in a log house, right? So I bought a plane, and I would fly from Indiana to Toledo and to Cleveland. And then eventually, when they asked me to do the Berklee thing, I flew up to Boston.
Okay.
So it was like all these things just kept expanding about things that I'd always wanted to do from when I was a little kid. And they all came to fruition. So it was like, great. But 2 weeks before I was supposed to start at Berklee in 78, I got a letter in the mail that said, we changed our mind, it's not happening.
No. Wow. Nice.
So I'm like, what do I do? Because I had canceled like everything. I can't go back in and say to people, I'm not really going away. They already got somebody else to take my place.
Sure.
So my brother-in-law at the time is vice president of Aetna Insurance. And he said, well, I don't know if you want to do this, but they're looking for somebody to manage this island that they're trying to turn into a resort. An
Nice.
island. Okay. And I've always been like a water guy. So what does this entail? So it's an island in Lake Erie. It's 10 miles offshore. And it's called Rattlesnake Island.
Okay.
So so I say, I'll do this because I got nothing, you know. So I ended up selling my car, loading all my drums and everything onto a boat, and taking it out to this island. And I have a house, and there's an airstrip there. That's where I learned how to fly as it unwinds, my being there, the experience. But it ended up being like, instead of like a regular take care of business thing, I worked 62 straight days, I think, and it was 16-hour days. So I'm not really playing too much, but drummers are coming up to visit me. Paul Samuels, Phil Raskin would come up and stay. I got drums there and everything, but it was a wild time. It was something you couldn't buy an experience like that, but it would be something I would never do again. And then I'm doing things like with friends, and Kaliva Nuclear Toot was a fusion band I was part of. And we're opening for like Miroslav. I see him again. And after the Weather Report thing, Miroslav and I got along. So he invited me. I came and did work with him in New York City at the bitter end and stuff like that over the Shepherd's Journey music stuff that he had under his own name. And then back to the woods. And then they finally called me again in 1982 to do school. And I'm going like, are you sure? So I say, okay, I'll do that. And they flew me up and everything. And we did an actual interview. They flew me up from Detroit. I think I was working in Detroit. And got the whole thing settled. And then I showed up at Berklee in September of '82. And I'm still there in the basement.
Nice. So you taught a lot of people who have come through there.
Yeah. Well, and students, I've had a lot of really good students that made names for themselves. Todd Zuckerman. Man, I'm spacing on the names from all. I have them written down somewhere because I did that thing. But yeah, it ended up being really good because the head of the department was Dean Anderson. And he and I got along for some reason. And he would let me do anything I wanted if I had documentation that it was necessary. So the student, I would be teaching out of my materials that I had, and students would say, well, why don't you do a class like this? So I ended up writing 13 different classes and, go to music education meetings, and a semester of meetings and a picnic, and you get those things, okayed. So I wrote all these classes, and they're all electives. So my whole time at school was not private lessons. It was dealing with, I was seeing like maybe 170 people a week, pretty much every week for 25 years. And they were all populated by electives. You had to sign up to do it. It wasn't required classes. And then when Joe Hunt left, he turned over the survey classes, which were required classes. Those are history ones. And so I got into doing those. I was getting paid to learn history.
Yeah, beautiful. But I was going to say about Dean Anderson, the one nice thing about, I knew Dean very well, and I really enjoyed collaborating with him because he was one of those people that when we were doing the whole COSA projects, I would reach out. I remember we were bringing in Changuito from Cuba, and this was way in the beginning. I'm talking maybe 28 years ago, when it was like unheard of, those kinds of things. And so I said,
yeah, those are the World Percussion Festivals that he would set up. Those were amazing.
But see, we brought him in, and I said, Dean, would you, because if we bring him in, it'll only be for a week. Are you interested in having him here? We'll do a visa.
Wow, okay.
We'll do a visa for the whole summer for him if you take him on or be responsible for him. And then he went also to the West Coast, but we did all the work. We had to have 2 visas. One, what a story that was. Because with COSA, I said, we have to have all the top people on the planet be there. So I said, Changuito, he's in Cuba. We went to his house, which is on the 3rd floor. It was in August. My wife, Yolan, was pregnant, and we had to walk up. Got to his place. He says, would you do this? You couldn't just phone and say, are you interested? So then the whole process, the whole visa process, but to get him into where we were doing our workshops at the time was Vermont, but one year we did it in Potsdam. So the closest airport was Montreal. So it would be a lot easier to fly him in here and then get the visa for the States. Back then, those visas were very, very difficult. But one had to come in before the other. So I learned a lot, Skip, of logistics. And I'm one of those guys. I don't care. This is what we got to do. What do we have to do to get it done? Because we have to do this. So the nice thing about getting back to Dean is that he would always be open to those kinds of things. So we facilitated the whole thing so then everybody could take advantage of that. And then anytime that I'd say, what about if we have some of the teachers from Berklee come on, do a rotation, bring some people, because COSA and other camps and other situations were like feeders to Berklee. So let's get people prepared, have people from your school, from other schools there so that they can advise while they're working with all the top people, get them ready if they're going to go to school, and especially Berklee. We had Oscar Stagnaro as our resident bass player for a long time, for example.
Right.
From there.
Yeah.
And Dean, I'd call him and I'd have an idea, or he'd call me and he'd say, what do you think of this? And so we'd always collaborate, which is something I really miss. These days, you don't have too much of this communication and collaboration of things. Everybody is on their own treadmill, which I find a little odd, because I think if we put resources together, minds together, we can do a lot more for everybody, including, ourselves and what we're all trying to do, because we understand. We understand what has to be done. But that, just getting back to Dean, he was great. I thought he wasn't one track. Some people in our community, sometimes they can't help it. They are so deep in one thing that they don't really see the implications or the possibilities looking further. And so he's one of those that was great at that. Being a percussionist, open to all kinds of possibilities. I think as a musician, it's a lot more interesting if one is that way. In my book.
Well, he was in Pops, Boston Pops. So,
right.
And he played percussion in that, but he also played drum set some. And so he was always interested in what was happening with what we were doing on the drum set, as opposed to just percussion and the stuff he was doing for his regular gig. And he did that World Percussion Festival thing for a few years, and it was really big. Enrique Pla, guys from Las Van Van, El Negro, all the biggest name people for a while were there.
Yeah.
Pascual Morales from Brazil, he had been at school, and then I'm still in touch with some of these people, and it's been, 25 years or so.
Right.
And that's one of the neat things about drummers is Jamie had an idea to start a thing called the Brotherhood of Percussion, otherwise known as BOP. And that was the thing, because drummers help everybody. They help other drummers for sure. All those things that I got were pretty much from other drummers giving me gigs or helping me.
Yeah.
And then it expanded from there. But Jamie's one of those, he's the mayor of planet Earth.
Yes. Yeah, he's a beautiful man. And we had him at COSA, of course, and we go into these really deep discussions about not only cultural concepts, but really widening the listening process. And he was also into the technology stuff, which I do a lot of as well. And so I really enjoyed him especially, because he had an interesting background. He's from Cleveland, right? Also?
Yeah. When he was a teenager, he actually did some lessons with me at John Stiebel's studio, I think. And I had really long hair, and he tells people he thought that I was going to eat him. Because when I'm looking like that, back at that time, I was known as the woodsman. So, because I had really long hair down halfway down my back, and
Wow.
I was kind
But
of like a
and you're
hippie
a
kind
big
of guy.
guy. You're a very tall man.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I never had. Well, at that club, if I wasn't playing that week opposite somebody, like sometimes the music wouldn't be compatible. Like there would be like Waylon Jennings there or something like that, so I wouldn't be playing opposite of him. And so I would be a bouncer or that kind of thing.
Interesting.
And if it was a blues thing that wasn't compatible, like Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee or something like that, then I'd have to sit at tables with people and make sure I got them out the door off the floor when the concert was over. I mean, there would be really rowdy crowds. And I think Miles was there one time and he only played 20 minutes and he said, no, we don't want to play anymore. And he left and the people went kind of bananas. And they tried to get the guy I worked for, Roger Bond. They tried to get in his office and they were pulling guns and stuff. And I had to stand in the middle of that and ask them what they were going to do with those. I said, it was my experience that if people pulled guns, they used them. And then they looked at the guns, then they looked at me, and then it kind of dissipated. I mean, it would be just silly stuff like that.
Wow. That's amazing. Just changing the subject. You've written a lot of aside from the articles, books. You sent me this this thing the other day, which is 72 pages.
Oh, yeah.
Which I started reading through.
The right, left, right, right, left, right, right, left.
Yes.
Yeah, as it turns out, it's the rhythm of the universe. And
Explain.
it's like, really? But the pulses that make up the Fibonacci sequence
Okay.
are those same sequences that are the Fibonacci sequence. And the golden chain, all those things go back to the pulse of the universe. It's based on those same numbers, and those numbers equate to those stickings.
Interesting.
So it's like, if you want to get deep, I just sent you 95 pages of it, and none of it has to do with triplets yet.
Right. Wow.
So there's
Okay.
probably another couple hundred pages having to do with that same sticking and variations of that.
So right,
And
left,
once again,
right,
that
right.
was part of the learning experience thing, was that was all in response to a student asking a question. And in finding the answer for him, I went down this rabbit hole about this right, left, right, right, left, right, right, left. And then last month, one of my old student friends, Rich Farrago, he owns Flex Beater, the bass drum beater that flexes. He bought me the website for right, left, right, right, left, right, right, left. So we're trying to expand that, and I'm going to put up whatever I can that will people allow me to do, because other than the combinations that I came up with, I only put like 16 up, but I think there's 40,620 different combinations, but who's counting?
Interesting.
So it's that kind of thing, but all of it is other people's information. So it's like combinations of lines 5, 6, 7, and 8 from the stick control book. And then if you go to line 33, that is line 33 from the George Stone stick control. But it turns out it's the hand drumming thing throughout the history of man, from all the different cultures, for hand drumming or communication on logs, on singing, on dance steps. Any of that stuff are all linked to that. So it ends up being articles that I gave you and stuff from all these different people that are playing that, not necessarily relating to it as being that, but it is there.
Interesting. Because I mean, I'm a big, I did a lot of study in clave, of course, and I can go up for days talking about the clave and how it is the essence of all music, melody. I treat it as a melody, not rhythm. To me, there's no difference. It's melody, and rhythm is if the melody doesn't have it's not sequenced in some form. It's just a monotone, so it's just melody, and those 5 notes is the whole basis of all composition, apart from Indian classical music and contemporary music, Western contemporary music. Everything else is clave. from Beethoven to Miles Davis to a lot of it. And so when I was looking at that, when you said that, these notes, that's so the clave is 5 notes. So this one is 3.
Cinco.
Yeah, yeah, but this is the 3, which is the more fundamental than that.
Yeah, but it all comes from that same thing. And then what's linked to that too, and you saw maybe in those pages, is the Chaffee, Dave Garibaldi stuff about linear. The 8-5-3 sequences, those are the same 2 numbers, 3 of the 5 numbers that make up the Fibonacci sequence.
Right.
And it's all made up of singles and doubles. So my students go and they see clinics or they listen to Nate Smith or something like that, and they ask him, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "It's all singles and doubles, like what Elvin used to say." And they go, "No, it couldn't be that." It's no different than the basic vowels that make up the language of whatever when you speak in the world.
Yeah. Interesting. So when you have students at Berklee, do you put them through that, or is that a special request?
I try to, but it ends up being depending on what the focus of the class is. So if it's like the history of jazz drumming, I can show that sticking being used by Buddy Gilmore in 1914 with the band that he was playing with in Europe at the time.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And so it goes back to whatever style you want to hear in that.
Interesting, yeah.
But it's always been there. It's just that it's called something different, and of course it looks different depending on the culture that you're coming from. I saw it even in a book that Aggie gave me yesterday, or he showed me yesterday when we were working together, about this great Dundek player from Greece. He's this, I don't remember his name, but this book it's in there.
Sure. Well, basic combinations, single and double.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the root, and also, I mean, it's like the amoeba, or what would be a better word? The real fundamental of everything. It's very interesting, and you can get really deep into these things. But they're all just combinations of a single double. That's ba ba ba.
Yeah, and then Sergio was doing that stuff too, and he was going, because he's left-handed, he would reverse it, then the left hand would become the primary. And so the whole thing. And then another guy, not a student, but a guy that brought me to Veneto some years ago, he said, "Well, what am I going to do with this? I'm left-handed." So I rewrote everything reversing the hands, did it in finale. And when all you had to do was really change the lefts and rights, but no.
Yeah.
The thing was that, yes, depending on your focus or where you're coming from, whether it's right-hand lead or the left-hand lead, changes the whole perspective of what's happening with it, even though where it's coming from is the same.
Interesting.
And that 5-3 ends up being right, left, right, left, right, left. The 5 and the 3 are in linear, are the same as the stickings from stone.
Interesting. I'm seeing that. Yeah. Very interesting. Now we can all go back and study this. So this is page 5 of the stick control. If you look at number 5, 6, 7, you said?
5, 6, 7, and 8 are the paradiddle combinations.
Right.
And if you then go to 33, then that's the same right, left, right, left, right, left combination of lines 5 and 6. But you can make, I only wrote out in that pack that I gave you 16 different variations as combinations of 16th notes. But if you go and look at number 13 on there, then you have it's 2 beats of number 1 and 2 beats of number 3, but starting on the end of 1 ends up being cascara.
Yeah, of course.
If you take the left hand and play it, boom, ging, 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 wawanko, same thing.
Yeah. Which
And
is
if you take sango And that's the same cascara rhythm again, but respelled, orchestrated on a drum set. The right hand is playing quarter notes, and the left hand is playing all the notes that would have been the other notes that were not quarter notes in that rhythm.
Right, right. Yeah.
So it's like if you know mambo or, rumba, then you know the next step.
Yeah, yeah.
And then it goes into timba, and it goes into, it just keeps, where do you want to go with that? It's like a ticket to ride.
Yeah. And I always say, I mean, getting back to this is, for me, it's all clave and variations of the clave. So once you know this 5-note phrase and configured in many different ways, it's all in there. It's fascinating. Every time I look at it, every time I explain it, I learn something more about it. Yeah. Yeah,
it ends up being how many years have I been playing? And it was only like 7 years ago that I fell into this hole about right, left, right, right, left, right, right, left, because I watched that Dave Garibaldi video about the most important beat. And I went, wait a second, I know this. I know this, but I didn't know it this way.
Right, right.
And it's like, just like Sergio knowing it the way from the left hand as the lead, or, it ends up being your perspective of your path or your journey, talking about shaping your journey kind of thing, is that this all fits into like what your perspective is of what's going on. And this is specific to this sticking, but it can be, what am I missing besides this already? So I'm looking for this in other cultures. It must be in me. I know it must be in, maybe they're playing this in Vietnam or in Korea on that other drum where they play like this.
Sure,
I forget what it's called.
Yeah, that Korean, the
farmers drumming.
Yeah, where they play, the Samonori drumming, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so
and it's all the same. And it's all the same.
Wow, what am I missing now?
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. We could talk. We could talk forever, and maybe we should, but we should pick it up another time. I'm really, really happy that you took the time to do this. Finally, we got this together, and it's really interesting. And I invite everybody to think about this. What you were saying. Go back to what you said, Skip, about figuring out those combinations, because at the end of the day, there are really common elements. But what you do with that and making a larger or a longer phrase, but it's basically singles and doubles, and that's the language, right? And understanding form, not form, melody, understanding the concept of melody, because we're always playing melody. That's what I think. And even when you're playing cymbals, drums, whatever, I always treat everything as melody, and it makes a difference in how we approach. And of course, rhythm is in there. Without it, it's like a monotone. But I thank you so much, Skip, for taking the time and guiding us in learning a little bit more about you and what you were. How you shaped your journey, and it's interesting that each one of us, no matter what we're thinking, where we're going, it's just getting on that journey. You always have to do the work and show up, always, and things will always work, unless you're falling asleep or you decide that they won't, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess the trick is not to fall asleep. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so it's always been that for me of trying to see it as a learning experience. It wasn't that at the beginning, but then it quickly became something about, wait a minute, this is not just a drag, there's something in this to learn. Yep. And then take that and then grow with that experience. But thank you for the opportunity to be one of the 90 plus that you've interviewed and be part of shaping your journey. It's a pleasure for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Skip. And as I always say, to be continued. Thank you.